Hi everyone, welcome. I'm out here in my yard and we're going to be checking in on my 198-day-old outdoor worm bag. It's the one in the middle. The system you see here on the left is what I refer to as my outdoor compost barrel, or simply my compost barrel. And the container I've got here on the right is something I plan to use today to extract some of that great amount of bedding that we placed into both of those bins last time I was out here. Last time I was out here I had that container full of crabgrass weeds that I had pulled, and I ended up putting the large part of it into my compost barrel, but I also used some of it as bedding for our last feeding. Since there was so much, and I'm assuming there's still going to be a good bit of it in here, I figured we would just pull it out while we're working on the system to get it out of our way, give us a clearer view of how the last feeding's doing. The last feeding was an unusual, forbidden item. At least some people classify certain foods in their worm bins as forbidden, and what we put in there last time was meat. Something I normally don't give my worms, and the type of meat they got was some chicken. I think it was mostly breast meat. It might have been a mix of different types of stuff. I threw a couple corn cobs in there just in case the meat wasn't going to fly. But it's been 2 weeks now, and I'm curious to see what's happened in here. So we're going to put on a glove, get in a little bit closer to see what's happening, and check out how they're doing. They're also going to get fed today. Alright, let's get to work. It might not be all that much, but what I had in mind for them today was the 3 pieces of fruit that you see here in my hand. I'm fairly sure this is watermelon. These things all just started popping up out of the dirt in my garden this year. And I don't know, I just kind of collected them up, and I thought it would be a shame to just chuck them into the compost barrel. It seemed like an interesting food to give these guys. But I really was curious to see what a tiny little watermelon like this might look like. I was just wondering if it's red on the inside yet, or is it still green? And there again, I'm just assuming it's a watermelon based on its outer skin color. And it does look like it's starting to take on the types of color you would expect to see in a melon, but not quite there yet. Huh. Interesting. I almost expected to see red when I opened that thing up, but I really didn't know what to expect, tell you the truth. So I guess I've satisfied my curiosity. I'm going to put away my implement here and set the food aside so we can begin opening up the system here. Let's remove these top coverings. So this was all the crabgrass that I mentioned earlier. I also wanted to just get this stuff out of the way, and I know that I'm going to be pulling some worms out. I can see some worms right there near the surface hanging out. The moisture recirculates nicely underneath that, under that cover, being just a piece of plywood basically with some fancy paint on it. So besides this stuff I laid out over the top, I also had this little handful of material that I just placed right on top of the feeding itself. And I guess I should be cautious, but it's too late now, I suppose. I was worried that I might open this thing up and be kind of smacked in the face with some really terrible odors of meat rotting or whatever the case may be, but I'm happy to report that... Oh, maybe I spoke too soon. I don't know. I think I might have caught a whiff, so I might lean back a little bit. I usually try to position my body to prevent some of that bright light from streaming into the scene and turning the exposure a little bit to our disadvantage. Every time you get these little hot spots of bright light, the camera thinks that the whole scene is well lit, and compensates for that, darkening the whole scene in general. So I had put the meat on top of a paper plate and then covered it with another paper plate. So I'm assuming that's what we're seeing here on top, is the top covering paper plate. I kind of assumed that we'd be seeing a good bit of black soldier fly larvae, because they're the types of creatures in this bin that are probably the most well suited for taking advantage of this type of a meal, perhaps not so much the worms. So I believe that what I'm actually moving aside here now, these couple bits of material, are the chunks of meat. Phew. Yeah, I think we're going to want to get this stuff covered back up pretty soon because it is a little bit stinky. Luckily not, well, there again, I feel like I spoke too soon because now I'm definitely getting a good whiff of it. I'm not going to try to describe it. I'm just going to leave it to your imagination. I believe I'm going to pick up the pace just for the sake of getting the job done. And here you can see some of the bedding I laid down beneath the feeding. I'm not so interested in picking through this pile of meat anymore, so you know what? I think by covering it up and kind of wrapping it together in that pile of bedding, now we've sort of snuffed out the stinky odor of it, which is much better now. This will just give us a little chance to explore here a little bit more, and then I guess when it comes time to cover everything back up, we'll just do so pretty rapidly so I don't have to further enjoy the odor of that spoiled meat. That's pretty cool. That's like this, that's like the part of the corn's husk, more like the stem part of it, and the rest of it is just some of the silk and the leaves themselves. And what I laid down here beneath the feeding was just more of this crabgrass. This is the stuff that I expected to see more worm traffic in. This is the sort of material that the worms would like to probably be in, as opposed to the meat. And you can see them all squirming around within this stuff. When we finished here last time, we did not cover again because I was expecting rainy weather, and that allowed a little bit of extra moisture to drip in since all this crabgrass was placed in dry. I was just worried that the material in the system wasn't quite damp enough to promote good breakdown and worm activity. But after a couple days, I came back in and I covered things up again. Alright, there's a helicopter flying overhead. And there's traffic running by. I'm not too far from a pretty busy street. Hopefully we're going to be able to continue here without too much disturbance. So, I didn't really plan on going too crazy here, turning things upside down. I just thought we'd take a quick peek at how that meat was coming along for 2 weeks of being in progress down here in the system. It's getting a little bit cool, so the creatures that I thought would be doing the majority of the work on that stuff, the black soldier fly larvae, might be slowing down or becoming somewhat more dormant as the cool temperatures roll in. Luckily today's a nice warm day. I believe we got a couple days even warmer coming up in the upcoming forecast. So you know what, I'm just gonna place this right down in here without even opening it up again, because I really don't want to keep catching whiffs of it, although now I can smell it again. I think we're gonna do our best just to start covering everything up here. Here we got some leftover bits of corn cob. Some of the darker color ones were in here from previous feedings, and they break apart quite readily, whereas the ones that were placed in here alongside the chicken are still even kind of yellow and somewhat intact, not breaking apart quite as easily as the ones that are further along. All right, I guess when you get a chance to break apart the stuff in your worm bins, it gives that stuff greater surface area that the worms can approach it from, leaving less of it obscured by its own self. So once in a while it pays off to help the things that you're putting into your worm bins along by breaking them into smaller chunks. Now, some of the stuff I bought from inside is paper towels that I'm using as napkin. It's interesting, just the smell of the meat is causing flies to be attracted to it. Flies are amazing. They could probably smell this from miles away, and they come zooming over to try to get a little piece of it. But I'm going to be covering this thing up before any flies have a chance to capitalize on this. So let's get their feeding in here. I also bought a little bit of my crushed eggshell up from my wormery. If you're a worm farmer, you'll know that worms require some form of grit to help break down the foods that they're eating in their gizzards. So the stuff that I use as grit in my systems is pulverized eggshell. I've seen different examples of different types of stuff people use. Some people just use clean sand. I guess the type of sand that you would fill your child's little sand pit with that they play in. I guess the stuff that you pick up on the beach might not be so good. It's probably littered with salt and other weird contaminants, unless you have some way of rinsing it and cleaning it. So I think when they mention sand as a form of grit to use in your worm bins, they usually recommend that you get some of that playground sand. And it does seem like a good idea to attempt to cover this stuff up a little bit in an attempt to keep the odors down and prevent attracting critters. Luckily, that piece of plywood that we cover up with here typically is pretty good at keeping critters out, although I do occasionally see that something comes over here and reaches down alongside of it and pulls material out, trying to reach and remove stuff. Maybe they're actually eating the worms, I don't know. And for all that effort, and since they can't usually get very much out, I don't bother with it too much. More power to them. I'm willing to share. I don't think that they really manage to get very much, other than a little bit of bedding once in a while, maybe some castings, but they probably don't get too many of the worms, and they probably don't really get to the food, since the food's really in the middle, and the only stuff they can really reach around the edges is mainly castings, maybe a little bit of residual bedding or whatnot that's still in here. So I just figured I would try to bring out some of the stuff that's on the outer edges and cover up a little bit with it. It would just help us in general keep the material in here sort of mixed up and aerated, as opposed to letting any of it possibly become anaerobic. I don't know. I think these worms probably do a pretty good job aerating the material and keeping it nice and loose and fluffy and preventing it from getting clumped up, whatever. But it seemed like it might be a good idea to try to till up the outer edges. I usually do this when I'm in here, just to at least make sure that stuff on the outer edges is not drying too much. It was a very dry summer, so a lot of my plants just didn't do very well all summer because of the lack of rain. So it did seem like checking the outer edges of this thing, especially considering it's a fabric material bag, to make sure the outer edges aren't getting too dry. Luckily, it never really got to that point, although a couple times I think we did observe a little bit of extra dryness happening in here. But right now it seems like everything's just right, as far as I could tell, as far as, you know, moisture content in general throughout. And it does also seem like the bedding materials that we covered up with over here has also managed to get a little bit damp by being underneath that plywood and being part of the recirculating moisture supply that's in this system. And I think by that happening too, it draws the worms up into it, because I don't know why, the worms just seem to like to explore. Maybe it's just in their nature to try to work their way up to the top surface, or whatever the case may be. But I think we're pretty much done here. We've given them their feeding today. We had a chance to see how the meat's coming along. Hopefully the next time we check in here, it's further along or maybe gone by then. And who knows if it's even the worms eating it. It's probably the helper creatures that live in here with the worms. Or maybe since there's so much other stuff in here that the worms could be nibbling on, maybe I'll intentionally wait longer than just 2 weeks this time to really let that stuff break down, so I don't need to smell it again next time I come in here. So I'm gonna start bringing in these top coverings. I'm not sure of the arrangement being quite the way it was. Maybe it was sort of like this, with the more damp part of it facing down. And last but not least, the top covering of plywood, which luckily does a pretty good job guarding the system from intruders. However, you can see it's not perfectly round, and it does have a couple flat spots where whatever creature it is able to kind of reach in here. So sometimes I'll find a little pile of material out here on the surface near these two holes, and like I said, if they manage to pull anything out of here that they're able to utilize as food, then more power to them. They're not going to be able to cause a lot of damage. So we're pretty much done here. Feeding our Now, 198-day-old outdoor worm bag. This was feeding number 16. And, you know, I don't know. Maybe the next time we come in here, it's going to be covered in leaves, you know, because it is now autumn. It'll be November, I guess, by the time we get in here again, if we wait another couple weeks. And usually in my region, by that time, a good number of the leaves have already fallen off the trees. All right, everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.